All right, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to this next meeting of the Ask the Researcher MPA monitoring series. My name is Mike. I work at the California Ocean Protection Council. I lead our work on coastal and ocean biodiversity, and I'll be facilitating this webinar alongside Steve Wirtz with the Department of Fish and Wildlife and AJ with Strategic Earth. So this webinar is being recorded and closed captioned so we can make the discussion available to anyone who was unable to attend live. And if you've got any questions or difficulties viewing the screen or calling in, please just go ahead and send a message to AJ either in the chat, through email, or by text. He's going to drop his contact information in the chat right now. So we do have a lot of folks joining us today. So we ask that everyone stay muted until you're called upon by the facilitator. And during the Q&A portion at the end of the webinar, if you'd like to ask a question, please go ahead and raise your hand on Zoom. The facilitators will keep track of the hands raised and invite you to unmute yourself when it's your turn. And of course, you're also able to post your questions in the chat. So to help identify yourself and other participants, we ask that you go ahead and rename yourself on Zoom. I'll walk us through how to do that right now. First, go ahead and click Participants in the meeting controls, locate your name and click More. Go ahead and choose Rename. Enter your full name, first and last, and an identifier. And if you'd like to enable closed captioning, please go ahead and click CC in meeting controls. So we're all really pleased that you could join us here today. We hope to see you at the following webinars as well. This series was really designed as an opportunity for interested members of the public to get a chance to interact directly with researchers that are involved in California's long-term marine protected area monitoring projects. This is an 8-part series, and our goal in facilitating this series is really to support broad understanding of the science that's informing the decadal management review of the MPA network coming up next year. So a little bit of backstory here. Last fall, we hosted 4 community meetings to inform the public about the decadal review and hear their perspectives and priorities on marine protected area management. And really, one of the biggest, most consistent pieces of feedback that we heard was that folks want to hear directly from the scientists to help them better understand the research, the monitoring results that's informing the review. So these webinars are really intended to be responsive to that feedback. Now, before we begin, I just really quickly want to go over some meeting agreements that'll help promote a respectful meeting for everybody. Please stay muted if you're not speaking. Try to minimize distraction. Listen for understanding during the discussion. Acknowledge, seek clarifications of others' perspectives. Go ahead and openly discuss others or discuss issues with others who hold diverse views, but always approach those discussions from understanding, a place of diversity and inclusion, considering other folks' perspective. Keep comments concise and focused on the topic at hand. So just please be nice. We're all here to have a good time and to learn some stuff. So you are also encouraged, if you have input, in addition to the discussion today, to go ahead and email that input to the Department of Fish and Wildlife at the address that AJ is going to put in the chat right now. All right, that just about covers intro stuff. So we're very, very fortunate today to be joined by Dr. Jenny Dugan at UC Santa Barbara. She's going to give a brief presentation on her work. Very much a team effort here. There's a lot of other folks on this slide, but Dr. Dugan is the lead. So she'll be talking about her team's long-term monitoring of sandy beach ecosystems in California. After the presentation, of course, like I mentioned, we'll have time to hear questions from the audience. And then following Q&A, we're going to hear from Steve Wirtz with the department, who will provide a quick update on the decadal management review. So now I'm very pleased to turn it over to Dr. Dugan. Take it away.
Okay, I think I've got it. All right, can everyone see that and hear me, hopefully? All right, great. So I am very pleased also to have this opportunity to share our results on an ecosystem that people don't hear that much about in California, even though it's beloved across the state, and that's our sandy beach and surf zone ecosystems. And as Mike alluded to, this is very much a team effort. We have lots of investigators, There are several institutions involved in the, well, there's 5 shown here involved in the field studies, and 8 different teams. We field 8 different teams in order to collect all the data across the state. So that's a little bit of an introduction to the complexity from that end. And I want to give you a very brief talk outline here. First, I always have to take the opportunity to introduce beaches and surf zones as ecosystems. Then I'll give you a short study overview, results for the key metrics that we studied, namely surf zone fish, kelp and wrack, and birds, and that's beach cast kelp. Then, the closing summary and recommendations, and time for questions. All right, well, beaches make up about 75% of the open coast in our part of the world, but most have no long-term monitoring programs, particularly biological monitoring. And this is maybe in part because beaches are so dynamic and the sand and the biota are moving all the time. So permanent transects and quadrats really are hard to use in this environment, but we certainly have taken some time to figure out methods that will work. All right, and I hope by the end of this talk, you will be convinced that beaches are far more than sand and waves, even though when you look at them, what you see at first is just sand and waves. We know they're iconic assets for the state of California, bringing in billions of dollars per year to coastal communities, critically important for recreation, aesthetically very important to us. Our cultural identity is wrapped up in beaches. This is a surf contest at Huntington Beach. This is not one of our study sites, but it definitely gets a lot of use. All right, so beaches and surf zones as ecosystems. This is something people think a little bit less about, and many of our management practices for beaches reflect this sort of lack of understanding that these are functional ecosystems. But I'll just run through a few slides to give you some hint about how these work. So first off, the ecosystems and functions of beaches and surf zones are actually pretty important and mostly physical in nature. They filter tons of water. Think of your aquarium with a sand filter. Beaches are a giant sand filter lining the state. They're buffers that can store sand and accumulate sand that can then help buffer inland communities as well as infrastructure from storms and waves. And a lot of nutrient cycling goes on in beaches. They've been thought of as giant digestive organs, essentially, because the aerobic nature of beaches plus all the organic material, there's lots of cycling. It turns out that they also are highly productive and they're very rich prey resources on beaches for both birds and fish. And that's one of the important links for our study, is that these birds and fish that we're looking at are preying on things like these invertebrates that you see. The sand crab in the upper left can easily reach 100,000 individuals per meter of shoreline. So we have very rich resources. And then beach fisheries. We do have beach fisheries in the state. Surf fishing is very popular. And in fact, pismo clams were once a commercial fishery and are still harvested recreationally. We also have a beach nesting fish, the California Grunion, which nests right around the high tide line on beaches during full moons, and then the eggs hatch at the next spring tide. Beaches in California in particular are critical habitat and provide prey for shorebirds, and particularly wintering shorebirds that spend up to 8 months of the year on California beaches. And this includes endangered and threatened species like the western snowy plover, and this is a chick with the beach hopper in its mouth at the Campus Point MPA. Another factor about beaches is that they are highly vulnerable to coastal squeeze, where they're essentially long, narrow ecosystems trapped between development on the landward side and sea level rise on the ocean side. So they are sort of a poster child for coastal squeeze. And many of our beaches are already eroding and shrinking. And so this is something we really need to think about, their vulnerability. And this is just a picture during the 2016 storm at the Campus Point SMCA, just to give you an idea. This is a sandy beach and a beach access point, but during the storm, the beach is not very visible, let's just say. Okay, so I won't spend much time on the MLPA goals, but just these goals are what sort of structured our study in particular. So we're very interested, think surf zone and beaches though, in the natural diversity and abundance of marine life, and sustaining and protecting these marine life populations, particularly economically valuable populations and those that are depleted. And we're also, one of the goals is to protect the marine natural heritage, including these representative and unique marine life habitats in California waters. So that's just a quick review of those goals. And now I'd like to get into our study. For beaches and surf zones, we focused on responses to MPAs in a couple of categories. So we looked at direct effects, or we evaluated our MPAs for direct effects, and particularly focused on surf zone fish. And this includes a whole list of different kinds of fish. And if your favorite's not up there, let me know and I'll add it to the list. We also looked at indirect effects, potential indirect effects of MPAs. And this includes the connectivity across marine ecosystems, in particular, the transport of kelp and other subsidies from reefs to beaches and surf zones where it helps fuel the food webs. And then we looked at beach birds as indicators of how that connectivity was working. So those were our sort of three main categories for the study. And our study is a statewide study. We have an array of MPA and reference sites that are very carefully paired. One thing about this study that's quite different than the other studies is that you're only going to see 2 years of data, because this only started in 2019. So we only have 2 years of data. So this is primarily spatial comparisons rather than temporal comparisons. But our surf zone fish, we had 26 sites, and our birds, wrack, and people, we had 36 sites. So you can see it was a big, big effort spread all over the state. We did not work on the California Channel Islands. All right, just the beaches varied quite a bit among the MPAs. So our reference sites were matched to each of these beaches. I'll just give you, this is a North Coast example, a Central Coast MPA example, and a South Coast MPA example, just to give you an idea of the variety of beaches that we were working on. All right, so first I want to give you a very broad brush overview of our MPA and surf zone fish results. Surf zone fishing is a very popular activity. These fish are accessible to people from all across the populations, the diverse populations of California. It's a very accessible fishery. So it really is something that everyone can do. And a group of fish that we were particularly interested in for this study are the surf perch. And these are both subject of both commercial and recreational fisheries. The recreational fishery is much larger, as you can see in this graph. That's the dotted line is the recreational fishery for barred surf perch. As I said, it's shore-based, highly accessible. Several of these species of surf perch are fished quite a bit. The other thing to remember about surf perch is it's live bearing. So the babies are born right in the surf zone where their parents live. And these fish tend to have small home ranges and kind of stay close to home. So they're pretty resident. And particularly the surf perch are very dependent on beach invertebrates. So just by the numbers, we used beach seines. We used a 50-foot beach seine at all of our sites. We did 888 seine hauls in the first 2 years. And you'll see that we caught a lot of fish. This is just total fish caught, and then the different numbers of species caught in each region. And the total number of species is 67, and that's unique species. So that's why the numbers don't add up in this little table for the species. We also used something called a BRUV, a baited remote underwater video camera. And we put these out at all of the same sites where we did the seining. And they went in about 6 to 10 feet of water. They were deployed by swimmers. We have an entire MER person's teams that swim through the surf with these things and drop them off. And we have about 500 hours of video that we analyzed. And this was really new for California. And again, we saw many, many fish in the surf zone and 81 unique species across the regions. So how about some of the results? Well, first, this is very broad brush. So species richness, what we found was that for the BRUVS, which is the top plot, and I don't know if you can see my mouse, but there was a significant MPA signal in species richness for the BRUVS. But for then about twice as many species were seen on the BRUVS as we caught in the seines. But for the seines, that same comparison yielded no difference between MPA and reference sites for the state. When we look at abundance, we had a similar sort of result for BRUVS and seines. When we look at the BRUVS, the top plot, significant MPA signal in our abundance estimate, which we call max N. But for the seines, there was no significant MPA signal in abundance of fish or catch per unit effort. For the seines, we were also, because we measured every single fish that we caught, we were able to also estimate the biomass that we caught in the seines. And even though the abundance did not differ significantly between MPAs and reference sites for the seines, the biomass did differ significantly. We got, it's about a 30% greater biomass in the MPAs than in the reference sites, and a significant MPA signal, particularly for targeted fish, but also for all fish. Our non-targeted fish, it turns out, were very low biomass and there was no MPA signal, but they were, if you were to compare them on this graph, you could barely see the bars. So they're very, very low numbers in biomass of non-targeted fish. All right. So what else did we find out about surf zone fish? Well, one thing we found out is that there are very strong regional signals in our MPA signal. So that's maybe too many signals, but the regional signals are significant. And the big take home that we also saw for kelp forest biota is that the strongest signals for the MPA versus reference site were in the south region. And you can see that in these two plots. This is the max N and this is the biomass of targeted fish. So you can see the south not only has more, there's a much bigger MPA signal in both of these. So that's a very interesting result. The other thing I wanted to drill down a little bit on is our surf perch and MPAs. So what we found for surf perch is that they had higher abundance in MPAs than in reference sites, but it's nearly significant difference, and maybe more data, more years, that would be significant, but that's what we found. There was also a significant, oh, I'm sorry. And for biomass, I don't have a photo. Let me run this video too. I don't have a photo, but the biomass of certain species like the barred surf perch was greater in MPAs than in reference sites. There was again a significant regional signal in surf perch, and the body size of our top species. Okay, that's small. I love this video of baby surf perch. Particularly barred and silver surf perch, we had larger adults in the MPAs, and interestingly, not only did we have more large adults, we had more young of the year, more babies, and that's what you're seeing in these videos. And these surf perch were born there. So this is an interesting MPA signal when your young and your adults are more abundant. Oh, sorry, I'm supposed to go to the next slide, but now all I can do is play the video. Okay, here we go. And another group that most people are familiar with, the sharks and rays, also showed a significant MPA signal when we drilled down into the groups. And that was our shark and ray group was significantly more abundant in the Surf-BRUVS than in the MPAs than in the reference sites for the Surf-BRUVS. And again, a very strong regional signal with the strongest signal for the sharks and rays in the south. And these are all just screenshots from the videos. So some of our sites are really nice for screenshots. All right, so leaving the fish behind, crawling out of the water, taking off our fins, we're going to look at some of these indirect effects of MPAs that we explored in our study. And those are the connectivity with kelp wrack and the beach birds. So for the California coast, just a reminder, this connectivity, it's very different than connectivity of larvae, but it's really important for beaches. So connectivity of kelp plants and kelp detritus and kelp fronds washing into the beach from kelp forests is critically important for fueling beach food webs. So if you have a healthy kelp forest, which you might expect to have in an MPA, and good connectivity to a beach, your beach should be more productive and richer in biodiversity where it gets good supplies of kelp. And for our baseline studies, we found very strong linkages between kelp forests and beaches. Now, I could go on about that, but I won't. I just want to give you more of these broad brush results. So for rack cover, during this 2-year study, we saw no significant signal for MPAs in the amount of kelp that was cast on the beach. Again, we saw strong regional variation. And if you want to know what that kelp was, it was mostly kelps like Macrocystis and Nereocystis and Surf-BRUVS. Those were the most abundant rack types. And we did also count kelp plants that were stranded. And just so you know that we can count pretty high, we counted more than 33,000 kelp plants stranded on our study beaches in the 2 years. How about the birds? So by the numbers, we saw a lot of birds. We observed a lot of birds in our study. We had 104 different species and almost 39,000 birds in the 2 years of the study on the beaches. And these birds are counted on 1 kilometer transects. So think of this as 36 kilometers. We saw almost 39,000 birds over this study period. And how did the birds respond to MPAs? Well, we saw no broad MPA signals in the birds. And when we broke them into groups, our top 3 birds, the gulls were the most abundant here. And you can see they actually seem to be more abundant, although not significantly so, in reference sites, which is interesting. Shorebirds, slightly more abundant in MPAs, as were seabirds, but those are our top 3 groups, and none of those signals were significant. We only had 7 months of data. It was only one season that we did. So this may be something that more data would give us more insights into these differences. And now let's drill down into the shorebirds a little bit. So you saw those data for shorebirds. It's about 30% greater in MPAs, but as I said, this is not a significant signal. But again, strong regional variation. Another finding for shorebirds is that the peak values for shorebird abundance were observed in MPAs. Now, MPAs were not chosen to give shorebirds places to be, but it turns out that our California MPAs, a number of them are what I would call hotspots for wintering shorebirds. So in terms of conservation, I think that's an important take-home lesson in terms of conserving representative marine habitat. Now, if we look at the species, these are shorebirds. So these are your sandpipers and things like that. So the most abundant was the sanderling, and it was 50% more abundant in MPAs, as you can see in this graph. But again, that was not a significant difference. There was tons of variability. Our threatened western snowy plover that both nests and winters on the beaches, again, more abundant in the MPAs, but not significant. And we have 10 beaches where this bird nests in our study and 12 beaches where it winters. So we had a pretty good representation of this species, this threatened species in our study. And then the one of the top shorebirds that did exhibit a significant MPA signal was the black-bellied plover. And this is a bird, there's a picture at the bottom here, there we go, that is very much dependent on rack and the invertebrates that live around rack for its wintering food. All right, and what about shorebirds and rack? Well, this is a plot of our data for all of our sites, both the MPA and the reference sites, and the relationship with rack cover. So here's the abundance of shorebirds and the relationship with rack cover. We found a significant relationship, but I have to say that this was much weaker than what we saw in the baseline studies of the regions where we were able to do baseline studies. We also have to say that if you look at the scatter points, there's no MPA signal in the relationship between rack and shorebirds. And the other piece is that this trend was largely driven, even though you can't see it in this graphic, it was largely driven by our results from the South region. And there's a couple of hypotheses that we'd like to explore further for this. One is that the loss of kelp forests in the north may well have contributed to this weaker, it's still a very strong relationship, but weaker than we saw in the past relationship. And also we saw a number of sites where the shorebird numbers were much lower than we observed in the baseline studies for the respective regions. So that combination of the kelp forests loss in the north in particular and the shorebird declines may be contributing to this interesting shift in the correlation.
We have about 5 minutes left, Dr. Dugan.
Perfect. Thanks, AJ. All right. And I am at the summary, so I think we're going to be okay. So just to briefly summarize, and I apologize if I went really quickly through these broad brush results, we did see some direct MPA signals for surf zone fish. And that would be species richness, abundance, biomass, and the size of fish. But importantly, the strength and potential significance of that signal really varied with the survey type, whether it was a BRUV or a seine, and also the fish group. So some of our fish that were live bearing or lay eggs in the same habitat, like sharks and rays and surf perch, had a stronger signal. The other big take home is that the regional signals were very, very strong, and the south is where those MPA signals were strongest. So for our indirect effects, just to wrap this summary, you just heard about this, but for wrack and birds, we really didn't see much evidence of an MPA signal, a little bit here and there, but this finding that the peak abundance of shorebirds was observed in MPAs is important in terms of considering conservation value of MPAs for species that are not harvested. And then our wrack and shorebird correlations, I think these point to both potential MPA as well as climate effects in these ecosystems of beaches and surf zones. So I have a few recommendations, very general. I'm sure you all can think of more, but I think it would be worth doing more long-term monitoring of these beach ecosystems, both to better understand the climate signal or the MPA signals we detected in these 2 years of study, and also to look at climate responses of these highly vulnerable ecosystems over time. I think that beach management offers a number of, current beach management offers a number of opportunities for conservation, where simple changes in management could really change how the beach could function and behave. And I also, MPA boundaries end at the mean high tide line, and extending those landward where possible would be very beneficial for beaches and surf zones, particularly looking ahead to sea level rise and climate change. All right, that's all I have for you today, other than answering questions. I have to thank many, many groups, OPC, the California Department of Fish and Wildlife, Sea Grant, all of our wonderful students and volunteers, state parks, national seashores, TNC, the City of Laguna Beach, and the UC Natural Resource System for all the support and help with logistics, funding, and just the hard work of doing this study. And I'd be happy to answer questions.
All right, thank you so much, Dr. Dugan. So now for the Q&A, we've got about 25 minutes to answer questions from the audience. We ask that questions obviously be relevant to the topics at hand, so specifically focused on the project that Dr. Dugan just presented. And we like to leave space to have a chance for everyone to speak today. So you're invited to raise your hand. Go ahead and press *6 if you're joining on the phone, and one of the facilitators will call on you when it's your turn. You're also welcome to ask questions in the chat, and we'll include those in the queue of questions for Dr. Dugan. We'll read one chat question per person as time allows today. And also just a reminder, we have department staff on the call here, so they will also be answering management related questions as they arise in the chat. And I'll do my best to take note when those responses appear. So we may not, of course, get to all of your questions today. So like I mentioned at the top of the webinar, we strongly encourage you all to review the recording, the snapshot report, which is also available, as well as the full long-term monitoring report for sandy beaches, and send any outstanding questions to that decadal management review email address that AJ put in the chat. So let's get to some questions. Cindy asks, is there info on how the BRUV and seine differ in catchability or ability to capture different species?
That's a great question. And there definitely is a difference between the catchability, and we find that when we do like a NMDS, that the assemblages are completely different between the BRUV and, or they're significantly different between the BRUV and the seine. And so what this tells us is that we are sampling different parts of that surf zone assemblage. And we do tend to see more adults and larger fish on the BRUVs than we do on the seines. But you know, there's overlap, but we do tend to get more of the big fish on the BRUVs. And the other conclusion is that everyone likes calamari, which is what we put into the bag.
Yeah, myself included. That kind of answers the question I had too as well, which is like, if we're thinking about sort of the future of long-term monitoring and how to, you know, what methodologies are most important for sampling these ecosystems, I was going to ask, well, could BRUVs replace seines potentially? But it sounds like what you're saying, because they're different assemblages, that you sort of have to have both, right, to get the full picture.
I think so. You know, we certainly see a stronger MPA signal. It's more consistent in the BRUVs, but we were able to get the size data from the seines, and we can't swim a BRUV with the video camera, the double video camera through the surf with any reliability of getting data that you could use. So yeah,
Right.
I think they're complementary in that way.
Yeah, and that size data is crucial. Cool. Okay, Anupa asks, in the methodology, your paper indicates that your control point, or your control was point in the tidal cycle, was a point in the tidal cycle, but can you speak to other oceanographic conditions and how that might have impacted data? So surf height, time of day, visibility, things like that.
Oh, yes. It sounds like you've tried to do some surf zone work because yes, the surf really makes a difference. The visibility for the BRUVs is critically important. The visibility for the seines, in fact, when the visibility is lower, we might actually sneak up on more fish with the seine. Not that we're very sneaky, but when it's super clear, I think the fast fish see us and get out of the way of the seine, but it's brilliant for the BRUVs. So it really, it's a mix, but big surf is never great for this. And we're very careful with our teams because you can get caught in a rip. These rips can activate with no warning, and the whole net can just wash out to sea with everybody attached to it. So we're very careful about surf, but clearly we don't get the perfect conditions every time we go out. We do go out 3 times a year to try and catch good conditions at every site. Hope that helps answer that question.
Cool. And it looks like Anupa also noted in the chat that she is a surf zone fisher herself. So that
Okay,
probably
yeah.
that's why she knows. Nicole says, thanks for a great presentation. Can you provide some examples for those simple beach management actions that local managers could potentially make? I actually had that same question. So thanks, Nicole. Yeah,
I certainly can, and they may not be that popular, but you know, some of you just reducing the mechanized maintenance of beaches, whatever form that takes, be it grooming or, you know, recontouring, all of that affects the invertebrates that the fish and the birds depend on. And some of the grooming actually reduces the ability of the beach to store sand and create a buffer. So I think just the sort of mechanized maintenance, the driving, all those things that people are pretty comfortable with on beaches most of the time really do affect these ecosystems. So I think there's some, you know, driving not at the high tide line would make a big difference for all the animals and the grunion that are nesting at the high tide line, for example. So there's just maybe some simple things where we could marry public safety with a little bit of ecosystem safety as well.
Yeah, that makes sense. So I had a question about some of the connectivity in terms of subtidal ecosystems to beach ecosystems. So in terms of kelp, you mentioned strong regional differences in the kelp rack results that you were seeing. So we all know what happened on the North Coast in terms of the marine heat wave and impact on kelp. So I was just wondering if you could sort of drill down a little bit into that and just, I guess, kind of confirm that is what you meant by the regional trends, that's what you were seeing in your surveys, was that drop in kelp? And then really curious to hear your thoughts on the impacts on beach ecosystems, because I think obviously we've paid a lot of attention to kelp and urchins and the dynamics in the subtidal rocky reef, right? But just wondering about how North Coast beaches have been affected.
Well, we saw significant drops in shorebirds on North Coast beaches, and the wrack was really missing up there, the kelp wrack in particular. So it was pretty obvious that there's a drop. We're actually with two postdocs here at UCSB. We're working on an analysis looking at the kelp forest canopy and the beach wrack data that we have from the baseline and this most recent study. So there was a big effect. I assume that effect, because the diversity of invertebrates and their abundance, the diversity and abundance of shorebirds were all correlated with wrack and baseline. And I think when you look at the North Coast alone, there's no correlation with shorebirds and wrack on those beaches because the beaches had no wrack basically. And so it is a big impact on the food web. It really just cuts out for the invertebrates. Around 50% of the species are associated directly with wrack on beaches. So if you cut out that kelp, and that's kelp wrack in particular, if you cut out that kelp input, you lose about 50%. Like it's a big impact.
Yeah, not surprising. Bummer. Okay, Amanda has her hand raised, so let's go ahead and turn it over to Amanda. AJ, if you can go ahead and unmute her.
Yeah, hi there. Can you guys hear me okay? Yes, I think I see my little mic going. So yeah, I just had a question related to the shorebirds. I'm actually out at Asilomar today, and we really struggle here with disturbance from people at the beaches and monitoring shorebirds and things like that. So I was just wondering if that was well, both in winter and in summer, we have nesting black oyster catchers that are really sensitive, but wondering if that was something, in addition to all those ocean condition factors, when you're doing the shorebird studies, time of day for when people are here, was that something you took into account? And also maybe extending the MPA boundary up above the high tide line. I love that idea because maybe that would help out the shorebirds.
Yeah, that's a great question. And one of the reasons we count on a full kilometer is because that gives the birds a place to go. If there are a lot of people on the beach, but people can affect the shorebird numbers, obviously. We tend to do our surveys based on a tide window. So, they can be afternoon or, it really depends on the time of year. So the surveys really move around time of day wise. We did count all the people that we saw on the kilometers as well. There's not a correlation per se, but it turns out that beaches that are very rich in terms of invertebrate prey, shorebirds will hang around even with people and dogs and use those beaches. They're not nesting there. That's the difference. These are wintering shorebirds that have a little bit different behavior, as you know, than a nesting bird. So I hope that answers the question, but we count all the people and all the birds and all the dogs.
Awesome. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I was wondering if maybe someday in the future, pairing up shorebird survey data with like the MPA watch data to see how people are using the coast and how many people are there, that might yield something interesting too. But yeah, the birds know where the food's at, I guess. So they know what to do.
Like, if lunch is there, they're going to figure out how to get the lunch, especially wintering birds. They're hungry.
Yeah. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you. Great question.
Thanks for your question, Amanda, and for calling in from Asilomar. That's pretty cool.
I wish I was there.
So Anupa has another question in the chat. Can you clarify a few points on the wrack sampling? First off, any ideas on how presence of invasives may have impacted your results? And then also, how did you account for differences in surf conditions leading up to your sampling days? Which I think you touched on, but maybe a little bit more detail on that.
Okay. Well, the wrack sampling, we did detect invasives in our surveys at beaches that had invasives, including MPA. So we were able to detect particularly Sargassum horneri and Sargassum nudicum in the wrack on the beaches, on the South Coast in particular. So hopefully that, I don't think it impacted our results. They were, a decent component of the wrack at times on some of the beaches, but they're definitely present. So just the fact that we detected them, I think, was important. But I don't think it changed the wrack patterns per se, in terms of MPAs or statewide. In terms of differences in surf conditions leading up to our sampling days, we really went for surf conditions on the day of sampling. The logistics of this project are quite complicated. So we're always looking at the swell direction, looking at the swell height, looking at the swell period, changing where we're going so that we can actually get a sample. You know, it's the same with the diving projects. You really have to play to the conditions. So we're not able to really account for the surf conditions leading up to our sampling days. We could potentially do that, but I think, I don't know how much would come of it because we sampled over about 4 months. So we got very different conditions on different days at times. Yeah, so we basically didn't account for what happened before. We just were happy if the swell dropped below 2 feet and we could seine.
Yeah, makes sense. Thank you. So I had a question sort of to take us back to the people for a second. So, I know you didn't necessarily, explicitly do any data analysis on human uses, but is there anything sort of anecdotal that you can offer about patterns that you were seeing about how people are using beaches, whether that's sort of MPA versus non-MPA or just trends in general?
So the human patterns were, there's a big regional signal, Mike, with more people in the South. And we didn't see, and I'm going to have Michelle jump in if I'm misspeaking, but we didn't see a big MPA signal in human use. We did have some beaches where there was, 40 people in the surf zone regularly. And a lot of beaches got very, very busy during the pandemic. Very busy, much busier than we'd seen in the baseline studies, during pandemics. So, we didn't see a big MPA signal in either humans or dogs, but there are some beaches that definitely have more people and more dogs. Yeah, and the analysis, we haven't done a sophisticated analysis, but we certainly could dive into that a little bit more.
Yeah, no, that's interesting. And I think as Amanda noted, there's MPA watch data too that I think would definitely be of interest. I know that's something we're interested in for the decadal management review is how are people using these different ecosystems? And obviously for California, sandy beaches are iconic and really culturally important. So yeah, good to not forget about the people. Not seeing additional questions popping up in the chat, but I've certainly got more. I could probably bug you all day.
That's great.
So this is maybe a little technical, but pismo clams, I'm wondering, that's a culturally important species, and I know they've experienced declines, and I'm just wondering if you have any thoughts on the population status of pismo clams right now.
Well, I think the intertidal stocks really take a beating during our El Niños and our heat waves because the beach habitat loss that happens. So I think they have a hard time. And also the razor clams, I'm sure, have a hard time as well. So any of these intertidal clams, they're highly vulnerable to fishing worldwide. So the intertidal stocks tend to really have fishery collapses. The subtidal stocks do a little better, and pismo clams have some subtidal populations that we don't necessarily have a good handle on. But I think that's the source of these intermittent large recruitments of pismo clams. And they certainly do benefit from, MPA protection because they're a large, late maturing. They're like, I call them the abalone of the beach. They take a while to mature. They're broadcast spawners. They have all those earmarks of they need to be close together for spawning to be successful. So they really have all those earmarks of an abalone that people understand the issues with abalone. I think pismo clams have many of the same issues. I mean, all you need on the beach when they're intertidal is a fork and, a low tide, and you got your pismo clams. It's extremely accessible, the intertidal stocks. So yeah, I think they are depleted at this point. I think they could come back, but part of that is the condition of the beaches as well as the fishing pressure. So it's a two-part issue. That we have to think about with them.
Yeah, definitely. I've never really thought about it that way, the abalone of the sandy beach, but that makes a lot of sense. Similar life histories. Okay, Nicole asks, for this and other project, it seems like the South Coast has the strongest MPA signals, followed by Central and then North. I'm curious to hear your thoughts on why that might be and what it means. Sounds like kelp forest loss is definitely a factor.
Yeah, for the fish, this is a great question. And it's something I've been thinking about. And I know the other PIs of the other projects have been thinking about, because this was very evident in the kelp forest results as well. And one of the hypotheses that we all are sort of kicking around, and this is not an answer per se, but the idea is that maybe fishing pressure is stronger in the South. So you would expect more of a relative MPA signal where you have stronger fishing pressure. That may be the case for beaches as well in surf zones. But we don't have that much data on fishing pressure for beaches and surf zones. The data is a little spotty, but I think that's a place we could look. The other piece is that some of the MPAs in the South are older than the MPAs in the North, and they've been around longer. So our Scripps, the MPA at Scripps, the MPA at Laguna, the Doom Cove MPA, they've all been around for quite a long time. And those are our sort of star MPAs in terms of MPA signals in the South. Point Conception MPA, where no one's ever done anything, but I think it's been a de facto MPA for a long time for the beach because it was on a private ranch. That's another one that's really quite striking in terms of the MPA effects. Yeah, so I hope that answers your question. I think kelp forest loss could be a factor, but I think that's more a factor for the beach, the indirect effects right now than the surf zone fish. Does that answer the question?
Yeah, I think so. Maybe Nicole, you can put in the chat if you've got any follow-ups, but I think that makes a lot of sense. I mean, obviously, anytime you're thinking about MPA signals, right, or lack of signal, you want to think about the drivers of those recovery trajectories. So yeah, certainly like level of fishing pressure before the MPA was established, which has to do with how many people there are, age of the MPA, especially in temperate ecosystems like California. So yeah, I think you nailed it. So not seeing additional questions right now. This is a little bit related to what we were just talking about, but I had a question about spillover. So it looks like from your slides that your results show pretty clearly that targeted species, at least some targeted species, are doing pretty well inside MPAs compared to outside. Did you look at any evidence of spillover into adjacent unprotected areas?
That is a great direction to go. Unfortunately, we didn't. We weren't able to look at that. I think that would be a classic tagging study, probably with these guys to see how far. Surfperch don't go very far, but they can move, and so we just haven't had a chance. This was the first statewide surf zone fish data ever available, so I think that's a great research direction. Like I would love to look at that, but we haven't had a chance.
Yeah, and I know other habitat teams have been very interested in that as well.
Yeah, really important, actually, really important.
Not seeing additional questions roll in. Just a reminder, please go ahead and put your questions in the chat or raise your hand or press *6 if you're joining on the phone. Another question I think that's always top of mind for OPC in the department, Dr. Dugan, is recommendations for future monitoring. So, you noted in your final slide, I think there that that long-term monitoring is really important for these ecosystems and for other ecosystems. So do you have any thoughts on, sort of the where, the what, the who to prioritize, right? So what types of metrics, what species, as we move forward for long-term monitoring in the state?
Well, I think the metrics that we've been looking at, the three main metrics, would be very useful, both in terms of understanding that connectivity, as well as the direct effects of the MPAs on surf zone fish, targeted surf zone fish in particular. So I think those would be areas I would continue, just because this is only 2 years of fish data that we have. And, we really don't have a long-term sense of how these populations are behaving. And for the birds, the indications of declines and the changes in the kelp forests really sort of speak to a need to understand what's going on with that connectivity piece of the MPA questions. Yeah, so I would recommend the three main highlights. The invertebrates would be great, but that is a very expensive and very large undertaking. It's also destructive because you have to actually pull them out. You could include pismo clam surveys if people are interested in pismo clams in particular. Those could be included in future monitoring as well.
Gotcha. Yeah. Well, thank you so much. Those are great questions. And I want to tag along on your next sampling day. Yeah, it looks like fun, especially putting those BRUVS out. That looks epic.
Yeah.
So I think that looks like it for questions. Thanks everyone in the audience for some really great and cogent questions. I'll turn it over to Steve Wirtz now from the department, who's going to give us a brief update on the decadal management review. So go ahead and take it away, Steve.
Thanks, Mike, and thanks for that wonderful presentation, Dr. Dugan, and the work of your merry band of samplers. I know it's got to be tough getting out there, pulling the seine and doing the collecting the BRUVS, so we really appreciate it. Great. If you could advance the slide, AJ. Oh, you can go back. I'm sorry. So essentially, you're probably wondering why, if you haven't been following the process, why we're doing this decadal management review. And that's because, as you may know, planning for the network took place from 2004 to 2012 sequentially across 4 regions. And when that was done, we had a globally recognized, ecologically connected network of protected areas. So then we had to, from planning, we had to move into the next step, and that is the management of the network. So we updated our master plan for marine protected areas to go from a siting and planning document to be a more managed focus document. And so 2 key outcomes of that report are establishing a decadal management review for the network to look at, is it designed as the scientists and stakeholders had hoped for? And is it meeting the goals of the Marine Life Protection Act? So in that 10-year decadal management review is based on the life history of many of the nearshore species along the California coast, give them time to see change. And also it's more administratively feasible to do it every 10 years rather than some shorter period of time. The other main factor that came out when we updated the master plan was an MPA management program, which is composed of 4 components, and that's monitoring and research, outreach and education, enforcement, compliance, and policy and permitting. So as we prepare for this decadal management review, which is underway right now because it's been a 10-year cycle, we'll be looking at each of those components and the functionality of the network. And if you could advance that next slide, AJ. Perfect, thank you. So as you've heard from Jenny, and if you've been following some of the other webinars, we'll be pulling in information from the researchers who had done baseline monitoring. That's where they went out and established the conditions, biological and socioeconomic conditions at the time the MPAs were implemented. And they've been doing long-term monitoring, and they're comparing the two to see if there's been some change. So all that information is going to be put into the report. We've been working with California Native American tribes to learn more about traditional ecological knowledge and how that can inform management of California's MPAs and marine resources. That will be a part of the report. We've been reaching out with a lot of the stakeholders, the ocean community members like you who are participating in these webinars to receive input. All of this is another factors that will be coming into our report that we're working on for the commission. We're also coordinating with our fishery scientists, our wildlife enforcement and permitting group to build that broader picture of the program itself. We've been working with some independent science teams. We're fortunate the Ocean Protection Council funded 3 teams, and one helped develop objective science questions to evaluate the network. We've also had a group that was looking at the potential for the MPAs to have some resilience or not to climate change. And then also we've been working right now with a group that has been looking at all the various habitats that are basically the ones that have been in this webinar and looking at the connectivity of those habitats and the connection between them. And so all that is coming together, and we expect that will result in more questions and gaps in our knowledge, and also probably will result in more cost-effective funding approaches moving forward, and ultimately some adaptive management recommendations for the Fish and Game Commission to consider. And I should have mentioned in the beginning, all this work is going into a report, which we call the DMR, or the Decadal Management Review. And it will be available for the public, we anticipate, in January to review and think about it, and we'll officially transmit it to our Fish and Game Commission in February. We anticipate in February 2023 that the commission will receive it, and the department will probably give a brief overview of the components, but we don't anticipate any action at that time. Following the February meeting, there's a subgroup of the commission called the Marine Resources Committee, and that's where we're going to dig into all aspects of the report, and specifically probably the adaptive management recommendations. So I recommend that you stay dialed into the whole process. We're also anticipating a symposium. I'm calling it a symposium, probably symposium light, where we have the various partners who have done many fantastic projects and continue to inform the public about MPAs. The scientists come and share their information probably in March. And then in April of 2023, we anticipate the commission will provide some direction to the department how to proceed moving forward. If you'd like to be engaged, I recommend checking out our DMR landing page. It's shown here. Don't worry about writing down these addresses. AJ diligently is putting them in the chat box. We also look forward to receiving emails from you. My staff and I try to respond within 48 hours. So it could be any questions about MPAs, the Decadal Management Review. And if it's something beyond MPAs and beyond our scope, we have many talented colleagues at the department that we would refer the question to. So please stay dialed in, and I hope you attend the remainder of these webinars. They've been really fantastic. And with that, I'll just pass the mic over to Mike.
Thanks, Steve. Yeah, and thank you all so much for being here today. Thanks again, especially to Dr. Dugan for joining us and for that really great presentation. So we appreciate, Dr. Dugan, you taking the time to share your team's science. And it's really our hope sort of on the management and policy end that these kinds of informal discussions are really going to help, like I said at the top of the webinar, make the science informing the Decadal Review more accessible, more transparent to anyone who's interested. And as a reminder, all of the full long-term monitoring reports are available online on California Sea Grant's website. We're going to put that link in the chat right now. And as Steve noted, more information on the Decadal Management Review can be found on CDFW's DMR homepage. That's also going to be posted in the chat. Recordings of this meeting, past meetings, and future meetings are going to be posted to OPC's webpage and linked to the DMR website as well. AJ is going to put that in the chat. And importantly, our next Ask the Researcher webinar is coming up next month. So that'll be Monday, July 18th in the afternoon from 4 to 5 p.m. Same Zoom link, and Dr. Scott Hamilton will join us on that day to present his work with the California Collaborative Fisheries Research Program. So we're very excited about that presentation as well. Once again, if you have any additional questions or comments that we didn't get to today, please go ahead and email that MPA management review at wildlife.ca.gov email address, and a DFW staff member will gladly respond. Thank you so much. Have a great rest of your day and a great weekend. Take care, everybody.
Take care. Thanks.